Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Noah Gould back to the program. Noah, you've been on here a number of times before. Let's assume there's someone who is meeting you for the very first time, and I'd ask you, tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, Brian, thanks again for having me back. This is always an enjoyable conversation. My name is, as you mentioned, Noah Gould. I work for the Acton Institute for Religion and Liberty, focusing on our alumni and student networks. And I'm also currently a visiting research fellow for the American Institute for Economic Research in Great Barrington, Mass., and a tech fellow for Young Voices.
Wonderful. I'm looking at an article of yours that really struck a chord for me. This one was published in thefreebeacon.com, The Columnist as a Moral Compass. Now, let me explain why this hits me so hard. Probably 30 years ago or close to it, when I was just kind of starting out as a talk radio personality and a budding conservative, a friend bought me a subscription to the Conservative Chronicle. And I really came to love a number of those columnists because it just seemed like on current events, they could impart some perspective and truth. And granted, it was from a conservative perspective, but I just felt like there was clarity there that helped to shape my thinking. And so I love a good columnist. And in this article here, you're highlighting Peggy Noonan, who has been on the scene for quite some time. And I think her credentials are pretty impeccable. What do you want to tell us a little bit about her as we talk about your article regarding her new book?
Yeah, so her book is A Certain Idea of America, and I comment in this piece that, 81 op-eds put together in one book kind of shouldn't work, shouldn't be readable, but she makes it readable. And some of this is the themes that she's exploring throughout the book, certainly themes of connecting current events to historical events and the context that that gives. But overall, the key thing that she brings to the conversation is this really clear moral voice for a variety of different issues that really have faced the U.S. over two presidents. So the book takes place over President Trump's first term and President Biden's first and final term in office. And that kind of provides the scope for the events that she is commenting on.
Something you point out in your article too, and I think this is to her credit. This isn't one is good and the other is bad. She doesn't appear to have bought into the polarization, which unfortunately has seized much of the nation. But she takes both of them to task on places where they need to be taken to task. But as you mentioned, she also will give praise where it's due.
Mhm. Yeah, I work with a lot of kind of budding conservatives in my role, people who are going on into different careers, and this is something that's really difficult in the current polarized moment for them to navigate. And Noonan provides a really, I think, good roadmap for how to call balls and strikes. She says, these are things I disagree with, these are things that I agree with. I think it really becomes right now, if you criticize personalities on either side, you either get pegged one way or the other. And she, I think, really provides some clarity on different issues. She's really not a fan of Trump or Biden, but she kind of critiques and gives praise when due.
And as you mentioned here in your article, it's not like this is just a list of, okay, here's the chronological way these current events happened. Um, she does a very good job of connecting the dots of how those events shape the direction that ultimately we go as a nation, as a society, and also how they echo sometimes things that came far before us.
Yeah, I tried to ask the question of, why is her work so insightful in the kind of moral bearing she's bringing to issues, but doesn't go into moralism, right? This kind of finger wagging preacher from the op-ed world. But I really think that it's this rootedness in history that she's bringing in these themes throughout. She really gives best examples through bringing in historical facts and events. If you think back to one of her most famous speeches that Reagan gives, she was a speechwriter for Reagan for many years. It's the 1986 Challenger disaster, which of course was heartbreaking to the nation. School children watched it live. And when the Challenger exploded, there was this question of how is Reagan going to respond? And the way that Noonan writes this speech is he doesn't say, okay, this is just one tragedy that happens disconnected from anything else around it. This is this many years after Sir Francis Drake dies at sea. So she has this great line where she compares it to Sir Francis Drake. So exploring the New World, this sailor, in the same way that they were exploring the new world of space on the Challenger. And so that gives this event a meaning and gives it kind of a context and a purpose that brings it out of just what happened today, what happened yesterday. And that's what she's doing over and over in her columns, is connecting it to historical events, connecting it to religious ideas, and giving a bigger context.
Noah, when she talks about a certain idea of America, obviously there are some competing visions at work and always have been at work, in shaping, who we are as a nation. Is there a particular type of nation that she sees us as, or is there something that she a particular goal that she sees that we're aspiring to?
Yeah, so she does offer a vision for that. One of her op-eds is entitled "A Far-Sighted Conservatism." So she wants a conservatism that's focused on principles and lets that govern the day-to-day kind of governing rather than the opposite, day-to-day decisions that are governing the wider strategy. And so she is principled on things like free markets, on things like free speech. She is bringing back to those principles. There's also a theme in the idea that she's presenting of America of the little things are the big things. So the little habits and practices that we have, the importance that that bears out on kind of our national identity. She critiques John Fetterman for his wardrobe in hilarious fashion, showing that what may seem just like a silly detail really does show, okay, senators and representatives showing up to their job ready to work, and what they wear shows that attitude towards their work. She also has a real kind of takedown of what happened during the Uvalde shooting and the police officers not going into the building when they should have, literally holding uh, people back from going into the building. And she says, this is a problem of our character, our personality, what we call ourselves to as professionals. And that's going to bear out when it really matters. And so the little things becoming the big things is a theme for her.
And it's something you mentioned here, and I'd love to get a little bit of an expansion on what you mean when you say she is certainly no ideologue. What is it that makes an ideologue what they are?
Yeah, so Russell Kirk has a great distinction between ideology and principles. So an ideology tries to create this set of things that encompasses the whole world, that squashes the world into your view of things, versus a set of governing principles that allow you to approach the world but have enough flexibility to be able to have an openness. And so ideology really kind of dumbs down the world. It seeks to kind of control it and minimize it, versus principles help you navigate the world. Things like I mentioned some of the principles that she is certainly going to support, but she doesn't kind of defend every business person, for instance. She defends business done right. So she has a lot of criticisms of Silicon Valley and the way that they're approaching business, but she is going to defend free markets strongly. So I think that's one example of a difference between principled approach to markets versus ideology that is very restricted.
I think you do a wonderful job of making me want to read this book. I assume others who read your article are going to come away with a similar conclusion. And if for no other reason, Peggy Noonan has had a very focused eye on what's been happening in this country for a very long time, 40 some years now. She's got something worthwhile to say. We're talking with Noah Gould. Any final thoughts you'd like to add, Noah?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great book to read. And even if you have points of disagreement, I think her perspective is really worth grappling with.
All right. See, this is the thing I love about visiting with contributors like you. We sometimes forget it's not an all or nothing thing, right? Sometimes I think people think, well, if I'm going to discuss something, somebody's got to win. No, we could actually all come away better just for having had the discussion. Where can people follow you, and where can they find your social media information, for instance?
Yes, so you can find more information on our work at acton.org, and then I'm on X at Noah C. Gould 1.
And we are back. Happy to welcome a new Young Voices contributor to the program, Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome Gabriela Blanco. Gabby, it's great to meet you for the first time. Take a moment here and tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Yes. Well, my name is Gabby. I was born and raised in Havana, Cuba. I've been in the United States for 5 years now. I live in Austin, Texas, and I work with the Dissident Project. I'm one of the dissidents that gives out testimonies in schools and talks to high school students about what it was like to grow up in a totalitarian country, how I escaped that, what I'm doing here in the US, and we're just hoping to reach younger audiences and educate kids on the effects of socialist policies and what that did to our countries. So that's what brought me here today.
All right. Well, I'm looking at an article that you've written that talks about tariffs and sanctions, which I think a lot of people are starting to pay attention to here of late. But it's specifically in the context of how these are the long-term solution for Latin America. And before we get to the solution that can be provided through tariffs and sanctions, let's talk about the problems and the challenges that we're hoping to address throughout Latin America.
Yes, absolutely. So I wrote this article in response to the escalating situation that we've seen in Latin America when it comes to the economy collapsing, the export of criminals, and just people of that nature more and more, the mass migration issue that we've had in this region for such a long time. So it really, the talk about these tariffs, and I say the talk because it's still a developing story, right? So we still don't really know what's going to happen there. So it kind of came at a great time. And it just presented, just even the conversation on tariffs, a solution that I saw and I wanted to kind of talk to people about and put these ideas out there, how it's so necessary to put an end to what these governments have been doing and the countries that have been pushing these failed socialist policies that have resulted in this higher crimes and economic crisis and just mass migration, how it's so necessary that we stop providing them with the benefit of free trade with the US that has enriched them enough to get them to this point when they are where they are so powerful and where they're just completely taking over their countries. And we're already seeing results from just these conversations. So I was very happy to see that, and it kind of presents a hope for us that come from Latin America and the Caribbean that have felt the effects of these policies that have gone uncontrolled for so long. And now it finally seems that we have a president in the United States that is willing to tackle those head on and is not afraid to let these countries know that a free trade is not a right and it shouldn't be. It's a partnership, and both parties need to understand that, and it needs to be an ongoing agreement. And so it's definitely not a right. And so I was happy to see that, and I'm also happy to see the effects that are already coming from that in Latin America, although again it's too soon to tell, but it does seem that we are getting somewhere that we haven't been before, and it's great to see that.
I love that you take the approach of we're looking for long-term solutions as opposed to, well, here's the solution, but it's a quick fix and it could either be easily undone, when if a new president were to take office, or for that matter, if the circumstances were to change, in the countries on the receiving ends of those policies. Talk to me about why sometimes we need to look more at the long term than just simply what the short-term effect is that we desire.
Well, yes, because the short-term effects cannot be denied, right? Once you implement tariffs, you will see higher prices, you will see an economic slowdown. However, the long-term effects will be way worse than the short term. And that's what we've experienced. And that's why we are in the situation we are right now. I believe, and why everything has gotten out of control when it comes to migration. And now the United States is actually feeling that. So it does matter what happens in the continent. And it is important to seek solutions that last in time. And hopefully that won't change with the next administration. And hopefully these policies will stay long enough for us to see some actual reforms in these countries, because tariffs and economic restrictions are one of the few peaceful ways that countries have to negotiate reforms for the citizens of those countries, but also for those of us abroad that will feel the effects of those policies. Because at the end of the day, people are fleeing here, they are coming here, and the effect of mass migration has affected the entire continent, because now you have this influx of millions of people that have nowhere to go. So it's important that we absolutely search for something that's permanent. And I think as a Cuban, we learned that after Obama, when they just made everything more flexible with the embargo measures and lifted restrictions. And everyone was pretty happy about that for a while, except for those that knew that that was not going to stay, because unfortunately, you cannot really negotiate with kidnappers or terrorists. So what ended up happening is our Cuban dictatorship just got stronger. They pocketed all the extra money from those sanctions being lifted. Repression actually got worse. We had more political prisoners after that, and so it just didn't stay. It wasn't anything, as pretty as it looks at the time, it wasn't anything permanent.
I have a curiosity here about is the end goal of sanctions and tariffs not only to help equalize trade, but is it ultimately to bring the regimes that you've talked about, maybe with the exception of Mexico, Venezuela is at odds with the U.S. Administration. Cuba, I believe, is still at odds. Is it in the hopes of finding some place where they can meet again, kind of a neutral place, or at least where there's not that adversarial relationship?
Well, my hope for the Maduro regime would obviously be just democratic elections, and for the elections, the result of the elections to be respected. But at least for the time being, for that pipeline that it's been open, and all the money they've been receiving from the oil, for that to be cut off. And eventually that should put enough pressure on them to provide actual change for their citizens. So yes, that's my hope for Venezuela and the rest of the region.
That they get to enjoy economic freedom, like real economic freedom, um, and that basically the people benefit from it, not just those who are sitting at the top.
Absolutely. That's the goal for every country. Ideally, in an ideal world, every individual, every country should enjoy the benefits of free trade and free enterprise and free travel. But until we get there, we have to make sure we have to be mindful of who we are enriching. And if we are, as the United States, are enriching those that are enemies of the US, of the safety of the United States citizens and citizens of Latin America as well, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. And in the long run, it's going to be worse. So we're not going to really, by opening these venues and continuing that pipeline of endless money financing our enemies, we are not going to see any real change anytime. Like, that's going to stay.
Okay, again, we are talking with Gabriela Blanco. Gabby, it's wonderful to meet you and to have you on the program. I look forward to when we have you back. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram, Gabby Blanco, same on X, and you can find the Dissident Project as well under that name on X, Facebook, and Instagram.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are back. Happy to welcome William Barclay back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. William, you've been on here before, but I'd love for you to take a moment and just, for those who are meeting you for the first time, give us a little bit of your background.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back. My name is Will Barclay. I'm a political theorist and private consultant, also a contributor for Young Voices.
Well, and you cover some of the tough topics too. I got to admit, I looked at your article here from the American Spectator, and Palestinian allies, and this is in quotes, need to abolish Hamas, not Israel. First of all, I got to tell you, Will, that topic is just such a tough one to approach because everybody seems so polarized. But the point that you're trying to make here, I think, is one that really needs to be considered, and that's that the oppression of the Palestinian people is not coming from Israel exclusively. It's their oppression has other sources.
No, exactly. They have this tired phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, right? And they could actually throw every Jew into the sea alongside the state of Israel, right? And they still wouldn't be free. They'd remain oppressed and in bondage, but at the hands of their compatriots, Hamas, Palestinian Authority, and Mahmoud Abbas, right? This is the big fallacy, right? Any earnest Palestinian ally has to first preoccupy themselves with getting rid of Hamas and these tyrants in Palestine itself before they can even think about turning to Israel, right? And this is a funny thing. Even the people of Gaza aren't so keen on getting rid of Israel, right? They'd much prefer, statistically at least, to be rid of Hamas.
So, is it safe to say that Hamas is maybe a cure that's worse than the affliction that the Palestinians are trying to be relieved of?
I still call them a disease. I'm not partial to them at all. You know what I mean? There were recently protests actually in late March. The Palestinian people bravely cascaded. I think it was nine locations in Gaza. They took to the streets and they chanted down with Hamas. And Hamas has already assassinated the organizer of these protests. They dumped his body on his family's door and said explicitly, "This is what happens to anybody who questions Hamas." And so I just don't really know how anybody uh, could really advocate for Hamas and that kind of brutality, especially because the rights of countless people throughout Gaza have been violated throughout their entire regime. I mean, like homosexuals are executed, women, and I think femicide is actually up 100% over the past 5 year period too.
And yet, if I'm understanding this correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, um, when the Palestinians were given the opportunity to elect their own leadership, they chose Hamas. Was something sold to them under false pretenses?
I think in a way, but I think in a way, they've had to live with their own decisions for far too long. I think it's now 72% of Gazans believe that Hamas and its government institutions are corrupt, which is funny. Like we've all known they've been corrupt since the beginning. I just think it's kind of the ramification of these decisions and have really come home to bear. I think that the people of Gaza are disillusioned not only with Hamas, though, it's the entire Palestinian leadership. And so we can see these problems are kind of endemic throughout all of Palestine, the lack of infrastructure, the severe human rights violations, and just the poverty and the damage that has been inflicted upon the Palestinian people, not by the state of Israel, again, but by the Palestinian leadership itself.
I know that there are plenty of people who cover, you know, what they see as wrongdoing on the part of Israeli officials. But let's talk about some of the things that Hamas leadership routinely is doing to the Palestinians that doesn't get quite as much attention in the press.
Well, let's talk about budget for a second, right? Hamas allocates less than 5% of its annual budget towards the rehabilitation of Gaza. And so people in Gaza don't have schools, they don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have food, they don't have hospitals. And all of this is routinely blamed on the state of Israel when in fact it's very much Hamas. Hamas even refuses to pay for electricity in Gaza, instead to actually use those funds to attack the state of Israel. As I kind of touched on earlier, they're also guilty of severe human rights violations. I think that even the UN, if I'm not mistaken, has actually cited Gaza as a location of kind of severe concern with regards to human rights violations for anybody who doesn't adhere to the overarching belief system there.
So I guess the question then, before not just us, but before the people in Gaza is, can they get rid of Hamas, or does Hamas have control over them to a degree that they're not going to go, without a fight?
Well, I think this is the unfortunate reality. You touched on it exactly. The people of Gaza need our help, and by us, I mean external political actors. The West, the United States in particular. As I said, they very recently there are protests throughout Gaza, but the leader of the protest has already been assassinated, and the protests have been tamped out. The people of Gaza very much desire a change. I think it's 67% of the people of Gaza would happily have Hamas ousted immediately. but they're incapable of affecting this change without some kind of external actor. And this is why I think, say, Israel's recent campaign in Gaza and Palestine it's not as negative or, let's say, short-sighted as people might think. I think that it's, in a way, these external kind of campaigns are the only way to truly liberate the people of Gaza.
Does it seem sometimes that there's a blockade as far as um, global media coverage? Because this is a side of the story that really I don't think I've heard from maybe but one or two outlets, and it just seems the overwhelming narrative seems to portray, as you call them, the Hamas is this band of hapless freedom fighters, struggling bravely on behalf of the Palestinians, but we don't see the other side of that coin portrayed honestly, it seems like, in the media.
No, for sure you don't, because it's not romantic. It doesn't sell. I think at the end of the day, you've obviously seen Star Wars, right? I think that this is the paradigm that's being used here. Israel is routinely labeled as the evil empire, and Hamas, again, this valiant band of freedom fighters, the Rebel Alliance, right? And so it's a very effective narrative. It's very popular. It sells. And I think that the fact of the reality, if you turn around and you say, hey, well, the Yankees are actually kind of the good guys here, for instance, it doesn't really sell. People love hating the evil empire and the Yankees in the same way that they've grown to love hating, let's say, the rich white male as the source of all problems. And what is, let's say, the state of Israel or kind of like the Jewish person currently, but that archetype, let's say, I think that the Jewish people have been relentlessly misconstrued as a rich white homogenous mass, and so they've been fitted quite happily into this archetype that's been used to discredit their plight and all that they go through, and to label them again as the enemy and the source of the conflict in Israel and Palestine.
So, what would it take to effectively remove the wind from Hamas's sails? I'm curious if sanctions or I don't know what it would take, but are there any solutions that could be looked at short of eradicating them all?
Maybe not eradicating. Excised is maybe the word I'd use, but they need to be ousted from Gaza, and a new government does need to be instituted there. One that, by all means, could be a Palestinian government. But the roots, the seeds of democracy need to be sown there, and they simply aren't present currently. Some kind of intervention needs to occur in Gaza in order for the Palestinian people to be liberated and provided with the ability to really determine themselves freely. I think that's something that they haven't been able to do for years under Hamas's reign. And I think that they need to be afforded with this ability once more. And they are, like you said before, powerless to achieve this for themselves. And so some kind of external military intervention, in my opinion, needs to occur.
Well, and you just answered the question that I wanted to ask, which is, when I hear intervention, I automatically think it's got to be military. Is there any other kind of intervention that could
Um,
effectively remove them from power?
Well, if they were willing to kind of negotiate in good faith, perhaps, right? But I think that the fact of the matter is, Hamas, for instance, has committed itself to the destruction of the state of Israel in many of its fundamental documents and statements. And so I don't know how you can really negotiate in good faith with somebody who kind of seeks your destruction. And so I think that this is kind of the problem. I think that a different Palestinian government maybe. I think that the people of Gaza themselves are fully capable of erecting a government that negotiates in good faith with the state of Israel and other political actors. But I don't think that government will have anything to do with Hamas. I think Hamas and its ilk really do need to be expelled from Palestine so that democracy can take root again.
Well, I wish we had more time. I'd love to explore, what some of the other perhaps even sympathetic countries there in that region would do, but it seems like they don't seem very interested in taking on the Palestinian, populace, even as refugees.
No, well, this is the funny thing. This accusation of apartheid is routinely levied against the state of Israel, and I think it's in Lebanon. Palestinian people aren't allowed to own property; they're denied various human rights. But we don't ever talk about the apartheid that the Palestinian refugees are forced to endure in the Arab nations. We talk about Israel as this apartheid state, and that again is simply not true. Palestinian people are afforded with every fundamental human right when they're in the state of Israel. I can't speak to what happens to them in the state of Palestine. This is exactly or Palestine. This is exactly my point. In Gaza and Palestine, they have no rights, and everywhere else, or sorry, I didn't say everywhere else, but in the state of Israel, they're afforded with rights. But the opposite is very much what's communicated.
Again, we're talking with William Barclay. He is a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
You guys can find me on Twitter, X, at Will Barclay BBC, and I will get a Substack up and ready, I think, within the next couple of weeks. So look out for that.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Jacob Lane back to the program. Jacob, I know you've been on here before, but for the sake of those meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name's Jacob Lane. Obviously, I'm a Young Voices contributor. Happy to be one. I'm also a Newsmax insider. So I appear semi-frequently on Newsmax's website. We just went public last week, doing great. And I also serve as the chief of staff to Richard Viguerie. And for those of you who have young listeners, Richard Viguerie is the sort of the godfather of direct mail. So all those things you get in the mail asking you for money, that's my boss's innovation. So you can thank him.
All right. Now, I admit I knew that CPAC had been taking place here a couple of weeks ago. I didn't pay as close attention as I probably should have, but you have a wonderful article here from Newsmax about the energy of CPAC 2025 and how it needs to be nurtured to grow the GOP. One thing I have to ask you about, Jacob, is to my eyes, not just with CPAC, but generally, I am seeing a surge of young energy coming into the conservative ranks. Talk to me about that. Are you seeing that too?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I really noticed this year is that it's cool again to be conservative. It was with Reagan, and Trump has brought that kind of energy back into the movement. And something I talk about in the piece, I talk a little bit about the dark days of the Republican Party. And what I'm referring to is the days when I could first vote. My first vote was actually for John McCain in 2008. And in 2012 with Romney, when the party was sort of struggling to get young people active in it and to appeal to more of a broader audience, to get more Latinos, to get more Asian Americans, to get more African Americans in the party. But that's not a problem anymore now. I mean, the energy, Brian, at CPAC, it was electric. I mean, for every speaker too, obviously, when Donald Trump speaks, the room just goes wild. And at CPAC, it was just like on steroids. But even for someone like Tom Holman, who's the border czar, I mean, you should have seen the thunderous round of applause the guy was getting because, thank God, he's taking care of a problem. But not just Tom Holman, though. Elise Stefanik got a very warm reception. I mean, every speaker there, and like I said, it was just, you could just feel the energy in the room. And it's unlike any other CPAC I've been to. And I've been to going to CPACs now going on 10 years.
When you mention the names McCain and Romney, I kind of have a little visceral reaction because I think of them as those are two perfect examples of what I would call the uniparty, meaning politicians whose their words may sound conservative and they'll reflect whatever audience they're speaking to, but their actions as they have held office, especially as legislators at the federal level, make them almost indistinguishable from their Democratic counterparts. They're comfortably in that uniparty middle where we're not going to offend anybody on this side or anybody on that side. Whereas it seems like Trump and so many of the people who he has surrounded himself with, it's not that they're going out of their way to offend people, but just they're not willing to compromise in such a way that it's so important that we keep everybody happy. No, it's like they're more concerned about sticking to their principles, keeping their word, and doing what they said they would do.
Yeah, well, let's dig into that a little bit, Brian. I mean, look at the border. Look at how much we were talking about the border before the election. It seemed every day we were seeing hordes of illegal aliens. I mean, essentially invading this nation. And now we don't talk about the border anymore because the problem was resolved. Remember, they kept telling us, all we need is resources. All we need is resources. No, all we needed was a new president. And that's why we're not talking about it anymore, because Trump's taking care of the problem. Let's look at the tariff issue. Like I said, McCain was my first vote. So I really grew up, during the Obama presidency. Obama, the first thing he did when he got into office was bail out the banks, and quite frankly, the same people that caused the economic downturn. So he was rewarding those people. But look at Trump. Trump really doesn't care what's going on with the stock market. He cares more about what's going on Main Street. And I can tell you something from a lot of the participants at CPAC, they're with him on these tariffs because they're saying, look, we understand that stocks are taking a hit, but you know what? We care more about Main Street. We care more about making sure that jobs are available for future generations. And I come from a part of the country. I was originally born and raised in Illinois, right in the heart of the Rust Belt. And I can tell you that people in my neck of the woods, where I'm from, this is words to their ears. Finally, they have a leader that's looking out for them and not looking out for the invested interests of Wall Street.
No, and something else you mentioned here too is, the stereotypical Republican Party. Oh yes, that's the white frat boys kind of, fraternity here, or that's the kind of people you would expect to find. But you are seeing a lot of diversity, and I mean that in the good sense. You're seeing people of all different ethnicities, and I'm just curious, in your opinion, how have we overcome that hey, this is only, this is the country club and it's only for the good old boys? It seems like that tent has actually brought a lot of people in, and not under false pretenses.
No, and like you said, I write about this in the piece. CPAC really was a microcosm of America. It was no longer dominated by white frat boys. There were people that just looked like me. There were Latino Americans there. There were African Americans there. There were Asian Americans there. And I think part of the reason why these people are giving the Republican Party a shot is obviously because of Trump, but because for so long, the other side, I mean, we're a two-party state, the Democratic Party has just taken these folks for granted. They have taken these people's votes for granted. They've taken their support for granted. And look at what is happening to these people's communities. Look at what is happening to the inner cities in terms of crime, in terms of lack of education, lack of opportunity. Many of these people have felt firsthand the disastrous effects of Democratic policies. So they're saying to themselves, gee, this guy Trump, I know the media wants to make him sound like a really bad guy, but I'm going to try, I'm going to take my shot with him, see what he can do. He can't do any worse. And Trump said that all the time in the campaign. He's like, look, how can I be any worse than what you've already got? So take a chance on me. And thank God people did, because I think this is a winning coalition moving forward. If we can keep this coalition together for the next election, we can accomplish some great things.
One of the things that I did notice from clips that I saw from CPAC is there's a pride there that has kind of been missing for the last 4 years. And I don't mean that, over the top, chest beating, we're better than everybody else, or I don't get much better than me kind of pride. But you get the sense that Trump and those with whom he surrounded himself actually love their country, or are proud of their country, and want to see it succeed, as opposed to, I always got the feeling from, and this started back in the Obama administration, that there was a kind of shame. Well, yes, we're Americans, but we're working on fixing that. And it's like, really? What?
Yeah.
What are we trying to overcome here?
Well, and the great thing about Trump and company is that we're finally, we're putting our country first. We're putting our taxpayers first. We're putting our citizens first. And there's nothing wrong with being a global citizen. I'm all about cooperating with other countries. I hope many of these countries that have reached out to the Trump administration wanting free trade deals, I hope we get free trade deals with them. I think the world works better with that. But at least it's free and fair trade. And we are putting our country first instead of the other way around, which I feel that a number of administrations before Trump have been doing that.
Okay, one quick question for you to end things on. How do you keep a coalition like this together? It's impressive that Trump brought the coalition together that he did.
That's right.
Now, how do you make it last?
Well, I think Reagan said it best. He said, there are no easy answers, there are simple answers. And the simple answer to that is Republicans need to do what they promised. Look, we had a loss in Wisconsin earlier this month. I'm not happy about that. That race is going to have some implications in terms of congressional seats and a lot of other stuff. But that's one. We are in this for the long haul. Republicans, keep your promise. The border, the economy, making America tough again on the world stage. You keep those promises, I guarantee you voters will keep coming back to us, because you did one thing in DC that's really hard to do. You kept your word and you didn't lie.
Well, that sounds simple enough.
It's simple enough. Now you got to do it, right? It's simple, right, but now you got to do it. So
again, we're talking with Jacob Lane. Jacob, where can people follow you on social media? Where can they follow your work?
Sure. So I'm relatively new to Twitter, so I'm a newbie. So Jacob Lane USA on Twitter, and you can follow me at Newsmax. I write a column entitled "For Our Kids," and I appear there semi-regular.
All right, Jacob, great to visit with you. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks. Likewise, Brian. Thanks a bunch.